They erased his name from the will, but the German shepherd kept staring at the lawyer's drawer like the real inheritance was still breathing inside it. Nathan Miller sat near the back of Clara Bennett's office with rainwater drying on the shoulders of his faded field jacket and mud packed into the edges of his scuffed brown boots. He was 40 years old, a white veteran with broad shoulders, a weathered face, dark brown hair cut short but no longer kept with military sharpness, and a few silver threads showing near his temples. Under the jacket he wore a blue work shirt and worn jeans, the kind of clothes a man wore when he expected to fix something before the day ended. That morning, before the will reading, he had repaired a broken fence gate at the nursing home outside town because one of the residents liked to sit near the courtyard and watch birds land on the rail. Nathan had not charged for it. He had simply tightened the hinges, replaced 2 split boards, and left before anyone could turn gratitude into paperwork. Now he sat in a law office that smelled of polished wood, old files, and raincoats, listening to the last wishes of Evelyn Hart, the widow he had helped for nearly 6 years. Evelyn's nieces and nephews sat around the long table in dark coats, their voices low and careful, their eyes moving whenever Clara turned a page. Nathan did not expect much. He had never helped Evelyn for money. He had driven her to doctor appointments through sleet, stacked firewood by her back door, patched her porch steps, repaired the roof over her pantry, checked her furnace before winter, and sat with her on evenings when the old house became too quiet. Sometimes she talked about her late husband. Sometimes she talked about a lake cabin from long ago, then stopped as if the memory had a lock on it. Once, while Scout lay beside the hearth, Evelyn had looked at Nathan and said, "Some gifts are safer when no one sees them coming." He had smiled politely then, thinking she meant kindness in general, not anything with a deed or a key attached. Scout sat beside him now, a 6-year-old German shepherd with a black and tan coat, alert ears, a strong chest, and calm, intelligent eyes. The dog had been still through most of the reading, but when Clara reached the final pages and Nathan's name had still not appeared, Scout's ears lifted. The house went to one niece. The savings account was divided among nephews. Antique silver, quilts, jewelry, and framed photographs went to relatives who nodded as if the world had stayed in its proper order. Clara's voice remained steady, but once, very briefly, her eyes moved toward Nathan with something like apology. Then she closed the folder. "That concludes the public will of Evelyn Margaret Hart." The room released a breath. Nathan looked down at his hands. They were rough, clean, and empty. For a moment, the only sound was rain ticking against the window. He told himself he had no right to feel hurt. Evelyn owed him nothing. Kindness was not supposed to keep a ledger. But somewhere under his ribs, a small ache opened anyway, not for money, not for property, but for the simple hope that he had mattered enough to be remembered in a room where everyone else was being named. A nephew near the table edge leaned toward his sister and whispered, not softly enough, "He was just the handyman." Nathan kept his face still. He had been called worse by people who needed his help, and forgot his name afterward. Scout turned his head toward the man, then away, as if the sentence was too small to deserve a full response. But the dog did not look at the door. He looked at Clara's desk, specifically at the lower drawer on the right. Nathan noticed it because Scout's attention was never careless. The dog stared at that drawer with the. Nathan left Clara Bennett's office with the old envelope tucked inside his faded field jacket, and Scout walking close beside him through the rain. The courthouse square was nearly empty, its sidewalks shining under a gray Vermont afternoon, its maples dripping onto parked cars and brass plaques no one stopped to read. He reached his old pickup, opened the passenger door for Scout, and stood for a moment with one hand on the roof, trying to understand how a man could be wounded by being erased and comforted by being trusted in the same hour. He was still 40 years old, still a white veteran with broad shoulders, a weathered face, dark brown hair cut short but softened by time, and a few silver threads near his temples. His blue work shirt was damp at the collar, his worn jeans carried dust from the nursing home fence, and his scuffed brown boots left small muddy marks on the pavement. He had not gone to the reading expecting wealth, but the nephew's words had followed him into the rain. Just the handyman. Nathan had been many things in life: soldier, mechanic, night driver, repairman, neighbor, the man people called when a storm loosened shingles or a furnace quit on a Sunday. He had learned that some people only saw the hands that fixed things, never the heart that kept showing up. Scout climbed into the passenger seat, black and tan coat brushing the worn upholstery, alert ears lifting as Nathan sat behind the wheel. The German shepherd's calm, intelligent eyes settled on the envelope, then turned toward the folded map on Nathan's lap. Nathan opened it carefully. The paper was old, soft at the creases, and marked in Evelyn's hand with a narrow road leading north toward Heart Lake. A small red circle sat near the eastern shore, beside words written in faded ink, Cabin Road after the Birch Bend. He remembered Evelyn mentioning the lake only in fragments. Cold mornings. A dock her husband built by hand. Loons calling in fog. A cabin that held better summers than the main house ever did. But the family had always spoken of it like an embarrassment, a broken place too far from town, too damp to sell, too small to matter. Nathan read Evelyn's note again. If they erase your name, go where the lake still remembers. Do not trust paper that forgot kindness. Scout leaned forward and touched his nose to the brass key. The dog gave one soft breath, not excited, not impatient, only certain. Nathan started the truck. The drive north took him through roads that narrowed as town fell away. Rain thinned to mist. Fields gave way to pine stands, then to birch trees pale as bone along the roadside. Gravel began after the last mailbox. The pickup climbed, dipped, and followed a dirt road marked by puddles and old tire grooves half filled with wet leaves. Every mile seemed to loosen something from the day behind him: the polished table, the relatives' voices, Clara's apology hidden behind legal calm. But the ache remained, not sharp now, more like a bruise beneath the ribs. Scout sat upright the whole time, strong chest steady, alert ears angled toward the road ahead, as if he recognized the scent carried through weather and years. Near dusk, Nathan reached the Birch Bend. The road narrowed into two ruts beneath low branches. He drove slowly until the trees opened and Heart Lake appeared through the mist, wide and gray, its surface barely moving except where rain touched it in soft rings. The cabin stood above the shore, half hidden by pines, moss thick on its roof, porch leaning toward the water, window panes clouded with dust, and a weathered dock stretching out into the lake like a hand that had been waiting too long. The place looked forgotten, but not dead. Nathan parked near a fallen cedar and stepped out. The air smelled of wet pine, lake water, old leaves, and wood that had held too many winters. Scout jumped down and went straight to the porch steps. He did not sniff the shoreline first. He did not chase the movement of birds near the reeds. He climbed onto the porch and stood before the front door, black and tan body still, ears high, calm intelligent eyes fixed on the boards beneath his paws. Nathan followed with the brass key in hand. The door resisted, swollen from damp, then opened with a low wooden groan. Inside, the cabin held the cold dimness of a place closed for years, a stone hearth dark with old ash, a small table beneath a window facing the lake, shelves with chipped mugs, a cedar chest near the wall, and a braided rug faded by time. Dust lay over everything, but beneath it Nathan sensed order, as if Evelyn had not abandoned the cabin so much as left it waiting. Scout walked in slowly and circled once near the hearth. Then he stopped beside a floorboard stained by old water, lowered his head, and listened. Nathan shut the door against the rain and stood very still. The only sounds were lake water tapping the dock, wind brushing pine needles, and Scout breathing softly over the floor. Then the dog lifted one paw and scratched 3 times at the plank near the hearth. Nathan knelt beside him, running his fingers over the wood. The plank sat slightly proud of the others. He pressed near one end and heard a small hollow reply beneath it. His chest tightened. This was not neglect. This was a message made from wood, patience, and trust. He took a flat tool from his pocket and worked gently along the seam. The plank lifted with a quiet sigh, revealing a dark space below. Wrapped inside oilcloth was a small metal box, dry and cool to the touch. Nathan set it on the hearthstone, and opened it under the gray light from the window. Inside lay a photograph of Evelyn and a younger man beside the lake, an old ledger, a second folded survey map, and a note in the same thin handwriting: "They can write you out of paper. They cannot write you out of what you repaired." Nathan sat back on his heels. Scout stood beside him, warm and steady, eyes on the box as if the cabin had finally said the first sentence aloud. Outside, the lake moved softly against the old dock, remembering. Nathan stayed kneeling by the stone hearth with the oilcloth box open before him, while the lake tapped softly against the old dock outside. The cabin had grown darker as dusk settled over Heart Lake, but the gray light still reached through the dusty window enough for him to see Evelyn's handwriting on the note. "They can write you out of paper. They cannot write you out of what you repaired." He read it once, then again, slower, as if the words had to pass through the hurt before they could reach the part of him still standing. Scout remained beside him, the 6-year-old German shepherd with a black and tan coat, alert ears, strong chest, and calm intelligent eyes, his body warm against Nathan's shoulder. The dog did not paw at the box or push forward. He only watched with the quiet certainty of a creature that had known the cabin was waiting before Nathan did. Nathan lifted the photograph from the box. Evelyn was young in it, standing on the dock with a man Nathan guessed was her husband, both of them smiling into a summer light the cabin had not seen in years. Behind them, the same porch looked sturdy, the windows clear, the lake bright and open. Written on the back was one sentence: "The place where promises were safest." Nathan set the photograph carefully on the hearthstone, and opened the old ledger. At first, he expected numbers, repairs, maybe dates from cabin use. Instead, the first page carried his name. Nathan Miller, first roof patch, October 12th. Refused payment, accepted coffee. The next line made his throat tighten. Nathan Miller, drove me to the clinic in freezing rain. Brought Scout. He listened at the door until the doctor called us in. Page after page held small records of kindness Nathan had never known were being kept. Split firewood before first frost. Fixed porch rail without being asked. Stayed during ice outage until furnace relit. Brought soup when I could not cook. Repaired mailbox after plowed damage. Sat with me on Thomas's birthday. Did not ask why I cried. Nathan closed his eyes. He had told himself kindness was not supposed to keep a ledger, but Evelyn had kept one anyway, not to turn care into debt, but to protect the truth from people who had stopped noticing. Scout lowered his head onto Nathan's knee for one brief moment. The weight of the dog's trust steadied him. After a while, Nathan unfolded the second map from the box. It was not the same as the Lake Road map. This one showed Heart Lake's eastern shore, the cabin, the dock, a narrow path through pines, and a small boathouse drawn behind a bend of reeds. A mark had been placed behind the boathouse, shaped like a pine cone resting over a wave. Beside it, Evelyn had written, "The lake keeps what the house cannot." Nathan lifted the brass key from his jacket pocket and compared it to the drawing. Near the key's bow, almost worn smooth, was the same pine cone and wave mark. Scout stood at once and looked toward the cabin door. Rain had thinned to mist, and the last light had turned the lake silver. Nathan gathered the photograph, ledger, map, and note back into the metal box, then slipped the box into his canvas tool bag. He considered calling Clara immediately, but the note had not told him to stop. The first envelope had led him to the cabin. The hearth box had led him to the boathouse. The deeper truth was moving in steps, and each step seemed to require that he listen before he asked the world to explain. He opened the cabin door. The porch boards creaked beneath H. Clara Bennett reached Heart Lake before sunrise, her headlights moving slowly through the pines like two pale hands feeling their way along the wet dirt road. Nathan heard the car before he saw it. He was sitting near the cold hearth with Evelyn's ledger open across his lap, Scout stretched at his boots, and the brass key resting on the small table beneath the window that faced the lake. The night had been long but not empty. Rain had come and gone in soft waves. The roof had whispered above him. The lake had moved in the dark with the steady patience of something that remembered every footstep on its shore. Nathan Miller was still wearing his faded field jacket over a blue work shirt, worn jeans, and scuffed brown boots, still a 40-year-old white veteran with broad shoulders, a weathered face, dark brown hair cut short with a few silver threads near his temples, but the hurt from the law office had settled into something quieter. He had spent hours reading Evelyn's ledger, page after page of small repairs, small kindnesses, small moments he had thought vanished into ordinary days. She had remembered the roof patch. She had remembered the furnace outage. She had remembered the morning he brought groceries when ice made her front steps too slick. She had even remembered Scout waiting beside her chair when thunder made the old house tremble. The ledger did not make Nathan feel important in a proud way. It made him feel seen, and being seen after being called just the handyman had a strange power to steady a man's breathing. Scout lifted his head before Clara knocked. The German shepherd's black and tan coat caught the first gray light from the window, his alert ears turning toward the porch, strong chest rising slow, calm intelligent eyes already awake. Nathan opened the door before Clara reached it. She stood under the porch roof in a gray coat, hair damp from mist, leather case clutched close. Her face softened when she saw the cabin behind him. "Evelyn said this place would look smaller in person," she said quietly. Nathan stepped aside. "It does not feel small." Clara entered, and for a moment she only looked around: the stone hearth, the braided rug, the dusty shelves, the table by the window, the old photograph of Evelyn and her husband set carefully on the mantel. "She loved this cabin more than the main house," Clara said. "Her family never understood that." Nathan handed her the ledger and the note from the hearth box. Clara read in silence. When she reached the line about paper and what he had repaired, she closed her eyes briefly. "She knew they might pressure the public will," Clara said. "She could not prove it before she died, but she prepared for it." Nathan looked toward the lake, where dawn had begun to silver the water. "So she left another path." "Yes," Clara said. "A lawful one, but hidden behind conditions. You had to stay through the reading. You had to accept the envelope without anger. You had to find the cabin, the hearth box, and the second mark. She believed only you would come here with Scout and enough patience to listen." Scout stood at the sound of his name and walked to the door. Clara followed his gaze. "The boathouse?" Nathan nodded. "There is a trapdoor under the canoe rack. I did not open it." Clara's shoulders eased, as if that mattered. "Good. Then we do this exactly as she instructed." They crossed the wet path together while morning gathered over Heart Lake. Mist lifted from the water in pale ribbons. Pine needles softened their steps. The old dock stretched into the gray lake, uneven but still holding. The boathouse leaned toward the shore, its mossy roof dark with rain, its weathered boards silvered by years of wind and water. Scout went first, moving with calm purpose past the cracked paddle and coil of rope, straight to the rear wall where the canoe rack had been shifted aside. Nathan knelt by the trapdoor, brass key in hand. Clara set her leather case on an overturned crate and removed a sealed envelope marked Lake Cellar Condition. "Before you open it," she said, "I need to read Evelyn's instruction." Her voice filled the boathouse gently, mixing with the lap of water against the pilings. "Nathan, if you are standing in the boathouse with Scout beside you and Clara present, then you did not let hurt make you careless. You followed the lake instead of the insult. Open the lower room. Let the record speak before anyone tells you what you were worth." Nathan looked down at Scout. The dog sat beside the trapdoor, alert ears high, calm intelligent eyes fixed on him. Nathan turned the key. The lock released with a soft click. He lifted the trapdoor, and cool air rose from below, carrying the smell of cedar, lake stone, dry paper, and something faintly mineral, like water moving behind a wall. Narrow stone steps descended into the hillside beneath the boathouse. Scout stepped down first. Nathan followed with a flashlight, then Clara behind him. The stairway was short but steep, and the sound of the lake grew muffled as they descended. At the bottom was a cellar built into the slope, dry and careful, with cedar shelves, a long table, sealed document boxes, old family photographs, lake survey maps, and a small safe beneath a windowless stone wall. On the safe door was engraved a pinecone over a wave and the words, "For the one kindness could still bring home." Clara drew in a breath. "She never showed me this room." Nathan moved slowly through the cellar, his flashlight passing over deeds, conservation papers, timber records, lakefront plats, letters tied with blue thread, and a framed drawing of the cabin, boathouse, trails, guest cottages, and a small field marked service dogs. Scout sat in front of the safe and looked up at him. Clara opened her sealed envelope and handed Nathan the combination. His hand was steady as he turned the dial. When the safe opened, there was no dramatic display, only paper, the kind that had first erased him and now waited to restore the truth. Clara lifted the top folder and read. Heart Lake Trust. Lakefront deeds. Conservation rights. Timber income. Family investment accounts. A protected fund for restoration and respite care. Her voice slowed when she reached the valuation page. "Nathan," she said softly, "this trust is valued at approximately $35 million. Nathan did not speak. The number seemed too large for the small cellar, too loud for the quiet lake above them. But then Clara opened Evelyn's final letter, and the money became smaller than the reason behind it. "Nathan, I did not forget you. I hid what mattered because I knew the people who wanted paper would never come all the way back to the lake. You repaired what others let rot. You stayed when rooms were lonely. You brought Scout, and the house trusted him before it trusted anyone else. Restore the cabin. Protect the shore. Build Stillwater Rest for veterans, widows, caretakers, old friends, tired workers, and service dogs who need silence without being alone. Let the ledger stay by the hearth so no one forgets that small kindnesses can become a place." Nathan lowered the letter, and for a moment the cellar blurred at the edges. Scout leaned against his leg, warm and steady. Above them, Heart Lake moved softly against the boathouse pilings. Nathan had thought he came here to find out why he had been erased. Instead, Evelyn had led him beneath the lake house to show him that paper had never held the deepest record. Kindness had. Nathan and Clara remained in the lake cellar long after the safe had opened, not because there was more drama to uncover, but because the truth required time to become real. The room beneath the boathouse was small, dry, and carefully made, with cedar shelves along the stone walls, a long table scarred by years of careful hands, lake survey maps rolled in canvas tubes, timber records stacked in sealed boxes, and letters tied with the same blue thread Evelyn had used around the first envelope. Above them, Heart Lake moved against the pilings with a soft wooden knock, steady as a heart heard through an old floor. Scout sat beside Nathan's leg, the 6-year-old German shepherd with a black and tan coat, alert ears, strong chest, and calm intelligent eyes, watching the open safe as if he understood that the papers inside had been waiting for more than a signature. Nathan Miller stood there in his faded field jacket over a blue work shirt, worn jeans, and scuffed brown boots, a 40-year-old white veteran with broad shoulders, a weathered face, dark brown hair cut short with a few silver threads near his temples, and hands that had repaired so many small things they had forgotten how to receive anything large. Clara sorted the folders into careful piles. Heart Lake Trust. Shoreline Conservation. Timber Income Records. Restoration Fund. Respite Care Instructions. Service Dog Provisions. Guest Cottage Plans. The numbers remained almost impossible to look at directly. $35 million was written in clean legal language, but Evelyn's letters gave it weight no accountant could measure. Nathan opened one from the blue thread bundle. It was addressed to no one, written in Evelyn's hand years earlier. Thomas used to say the lake made lonely people honest. You cannot pretend forever when water is that still. Nathan looked toward the stone ceiling as if he could see the surface above. He imagined Evelyn young on the dock, older by the hearth, then older still in the main house while relatives visited only when papers needed signing. Clara opened another document and said, Evelyn wanted this place protected from sale. The lakefront parcels, the cabin, the boathouse, the timber shares, and the investment accounts all support the same purpose. She structured it so the public will could be pressured, but the private trust would stand if the conditions were met. Nathan looked at the safe. And if I had left the office early? Clara's answer was gentle. The trust would have passed to a quiet foundation after a waiting period. She wanted to protect the place either way. But she hoped it would be you. The words did not lift him. They humbled him. Being chosen by someone gone from the world felt less like honor and more like being handed a lantern on a road too dark to walk carelessly. Scout stood, moved to a lower shelf, and touched his nose to a flat wooden case. Clara pulled it out and opened it. Inside was a scale model of the cabin, the boathouse, 3 small guest cottages tucked between pines, a widened but simple trail around the lake edge, a reinforced dock, and a fenced rest area shaded by birch trees. A small handwritten card lay beside the model. Stillwater Rest should never feel like an institution. It should feel like someone remembered to leave a light on. Nathan ran one finger along the tiny porch of the model cabin. He saw people there before the place existed, veterans who did not want speeches, widows who needed silence that did not swallow them, caretakers whose tired hands had never learned how to rest, old friends who had outlived the rooms where they felt known, service dogs stretched in sun on the boards beside them. He saw Scout lying there too, watching the lake the way he watched rooms, noticing what humans missed. I do not know how to run a place like this, Nathan said. Clara closed the trust folder softly. Evelyn did not choose you because you knew how to run a trust. She chose you because you knew how to keep showing up. They climbed back into the boathouse as morning widened over Heart Lake. Mist rose from the water in pale bands. The cabin stood above the shore, small, moss-roofed, tired, but no longer forgotten. Clara locked the cellar and placed a temporary legal seal over the trapdoor. No one else enters until I file the activation notice, she said. The family will ask questions. They may be angry. Nathan looked across the lake. They already thought I was nobody. That may change quickly. Maybe, he said. But the cabin has been waiting longer than they have been angry. Clara almost smiled. They walked back toward the cabin along the wet path. Scout trotted ahead, then stopped on the porch beside the floorboard that had opened to the hearth box. Sunlight touched his black and tan coat, and for the first time since the will reading, Nathan felt the sharp edge of the nephew's words lose some of their power. Just the handyman. Maybe that had been meant as an insult because people often misunderstood the dignity of hands that kept a place from falling apart. Evelyn had not misunderstood. She had written down roof patches, furnace checks, porch rails, firewood, rides through snow, quiet evenings, and the way Scout listened at doors. She had turned ordinary kindness into evidence no public will could erase. By noon, Clara had driven back toward town with the trust papers secured, and Nathan stayed at the cabin with Scout. He opened the windows carefully, swept the hearth, set Evelyn's ledger on the table, and patched a loose step on the porch because he could not stand watching someone's memory lean when he had the tools to steady it. The lake brightened under a thin sun. Far across the water, a loon called once, and the sound traveled over the stillness like a blessing not meant to be explained. Nathan sat on the porch at last, Scout lying beside him with his head on his paws. He looked at the dock, the boathouse, the pines, and the cabin that had kept Evelyn's promise safe. He had come here wounded by the thought of being erased. Now he understood that some names disappear from paper only because someone wiser has written them into a place. By the second morning at Heart Lake, Nathan had stopped thinking of the cabin as abandoned. It still looked that way from the outside, moss on the roof, porch boards bowed by years of damp weather, dock rails gray and splintered, windows clouded by dust, and pine needles gathered in the corners like old letters never sent. But after the cellar beneath the boathouse, after Evelyn's ledger, after Clara's confirmation of the Heart Lake Trust, Nathan could feel the difference between a place forgotten and a place waiting. He woke in the chair beside the hearth with Scout asleep near his boots, the lake pale through the front window, and the smell of wet pine moving through the cracked frame where morning air slipped in. He was still a 40-year-old white veteran with broad shoulders, a weathered face, dark brown hair cut short but no longer kept with military sharpness, and a few silver threads near his temples. He still wore the faded field jacket over his blue work shirt, worn jeans, and scuffed brown boots from the day before, but now the clothes carried the scent of lake wood, cold ash, and cedar dust instead of courthouse rain. Scout lifted his head before Nathan moved, the 6-year-old German shepherd with a black and tan coat, alert ears, strong chest, and calm intelligent eyes watching the cabin as if checking whether the walls had kept their secrets through the night. Nathan brewed coffee on a small camp stove he found in the truck, then walked the cabin slowly with a notebook. Roof moss and soft shingles over the north side. Porch step loose. Hearth draft blocked. Window latches swollen. Dock unsafe until inspected. Boathouse door needs bracing. Trail to road needs clearing. He wrote each line as if it were a promise rather than a problem. Evelyn had trusted him with a place, not a fantasy, and places became real again only through lists, measurements, and hands willing to begin where romance ended. Clara returned just after 9 with a temporary legal notice, 2 contractors' cards, and a trust accountant named Leonard Pike on speakerphone. She stood on the porch while Nathan tightened the loose step with screws from his toolbox. "The activation notice is filed," she said. "The trust is under preliminary protection. No sale, no transfer, no access to the lake parcels without authorization." Nathan drove the last screw flush and looked up. "The family knows?" Clara's expression was careful. "They have been notified that additional estate documents exist. Not the full details yet. That will come formally." Scout came to the doorway and sat beside Nathan, ears lifting toward the road. A few minutes later, a dark sport utility vehicle appeared between the pines. It stopped near the cabin, and 2 of Evelyn's relatives stepped out, the nephew who had called Nathan just the handyman, and the niece who had inherited the main house. Their faces carried the tense politeness of people arriving somewhere they once believed irrelevant. Clara stepped down from the porch before Nathan could speak. "This property is under trust review," she said. "I can answer procedural questions through my office." The nephew looked past her at Nathan. "We did not know Aunt Evelyn still had this place." Nathan wiped wood dust from his hands. "Seems she knew that." The niece looked toward the lake, the cabin, the boathouse, then the porch where Scout sat like a quiet guardian. "We just want to understand what is happening." Clara's voice remained calm. "Then you will receive the documents in the proper order." The nephew's eyes moved to Nathan's toolbox, the repaired step, the notebook on the porch rail. "So he gets to stay here now?" Clara answered before Nathan could. "Mr. Miller has met the first conditions of a private trust established by Mrs. Hart. Until review is complete, he is the authorized caretaker of this property." Caretaker. The word settled into Nathan more cleanly than owner would have. The relatives left after a short conversation that gave them little, their tires soft on the wet dirt road. Nathan expected to feel satisfaction, but all he felt was the old sadness of seeing people arrive only after something might have value. Scout leaned against his leg, warm and steady. Clara touched the porch rail, testing its give. Evelyn used to say the cabin revealed people by how they treated small repairs. Nathan glanced at the step he had just tightened. "Then she would have started here." "She did," Clara said, and handed him another sealed note marked for the first morning after the cellar opens. Nathan opened it carefully. The handwriting was thin but steady. "Nathan, begin with safety, not beauty. A place meant for rest must not ask the tired to trust broken boards. Fix the steps. Test the dock. Clear the trail. Let no one be welcomed by danger hidden under charm." He looked at the lake, then at the porch beneath his boots. Evelyn had known him too well. By afternoon, Clara had arranged for a dock inspector, a roofer, and a preservation carpenter to come later in the week. Nathan spent the day clearing the path from cabin to boathouse, cutting back wet branches, lifting fallen limbs, and marking routes that might trip someone walking in low light. Scout moved ahead of him, stopping at soft patches, sniffing old boards, and once refusing to step onto the dock until Nathan noticed the left edge sagging near the second post. "All right," Nathan said softly. You hear cabins better than people do. The dog glanced back with calm, intelligent eyes, as if Evelyn herself had already said so. Near sunset, Nathan carried Evelyn's ledger to the hearth and placed it in a temporary wooden box to protect it from damp. He did not hide it. He set it where the first warm light of evening touched the cover. The cabin smelled cleaner now, not new, but opened, lake air, pine, swept ash, old cedar, and coffee. The porch step held firm under his weight. The trail to the boathouse was visible. The trust remained a mountain of paperwork beyond his understanding, but the first day's work made sense. Safety before beauty. Repair before praise. Care before ownership. Scout lay on the porch as the lake turned silver under the evening sky. Nathan sat beside him and listened to the water touch the dock in small patient notes. He had spent years being useful in rooms where others held the keys. Now a forgotten cabin had placed a key in his hand, not so he could prove the relatives wrong, but so he could make sure anyone who came here tired would find a step that held. The first week of restoration at Heart Lake began with the kind of work no one would photograph: tightening rails, testing floorboards, marking soft places on the dock, scraping moss from shingles without damaging the old wood beneath, and carrying years of damp leaves away from the cabin foundation by hand. Nathan Miller rose before sunrise each morning, a 40-year-old white veteran with broad shoulders, a weathered face, dark brown hair cut short with a few silver threads near his temples, wearing his faded field jacket over a blue work shirt, worn jeans, and scuffed brown boots that now carried lake mud, cedar dust, and the clean fatigue of honest repair. Scout entered every room before him, the 6-year-old German shepherd with a black and tan coat, alert ears, strong chest, and calm intelligent eyes, pausing at the stone hearth, the porch threshold, the dock entrance, and the boathouse door as if checking the places where Evelyn Hart had hidden both danger and mercy. Clara Bennett came each afternoon with paperwork, permits, and the careful patience of a lawyer protecting a promise from becoming gossip. Leonard Pike, the trust accountant, confirmed the first release of funds for safety repairs, preservation work, and site planning. A dock inspector named Walt Granger tapped every post, shook his head at the worst boards, and said the lake had been kinder to the pilings than people had been to the cabin. A preservation carpenter named Ruth Bell arrived with measuring tools, gray hair tied under a canvas cap, and eyes that softened when she saw the hand-cut beams. "This was built by someone who expected it to matter," she said. Nathan looked toward the old photograph on the mantel, where Evelyn and her husband stood smiling beside the younger Doc. "It still does," he answered. They worked slowly because Evelyn's note had made the rule clear: safety before beauty. The porch steps came first. Then the loose rail. Then the hearth draft. Then the path to the boathouse, where roots could catch tired feet after dark. Nathan took satisfaction in that order. It did not flatter the place. It cared for it. By Wednesday, Clara brought the first serious challenge from Evelyn's relatives: a formal request to inspect all trust-related documents, a warning that the public should control the estate, and a vague suggestion that Nathan had somehow influenced Evelyn in her final years. Clara read the letter on the porch while Nathan sanded the repaired railing. The words should have struck him harder, but after the ledger beneath the hearth, after the cellar under the boathouse, after the safe and Evelyn's final letter, the accusation felt thin. Scout lay between them, ears moving with the lake wind, calm but attentive. "They can ask," Clara said. "They can review. But Evelyn's private trust was executed years before her final illness, and the conditions were documented. You did not influence her. You showed up." Nathan wiped dust from his hands. Showing up seems to upset people who did not. Clara folded the letter. Sometimes absence gets defensive when presence is recorded. That evening, Nathan opened Evelyn's ledger again and found another page he had missed. "Thomas and I built the cabin so Silence would have a kind place to sit. After he died, I thought Silence had turned against me. Then Nathan came with tools, and Scout listened at the door, and the rooms remembered how to be held." He read the words while rain began to tap the roof, and for the first time he understood that Stillwater Rest was not simply a charitable dream. It was Evelyn's answer to loneliness, built from the very thing that had nearly swallowed her. On Friday, the first planning group arrived: Clara, Leonard, Ruth, Walt, a veterans counselor named Aaron Cole, and a retired hospice nurse named May Donnelly, who had once sat with Evelyn during a hard winter and remembered Scout lying at her feet. They gathered around the table by the lake window with Evelyn's scale model between them. The plan remained modest: restore the main cabin, make the docks safe but simple, build 2 guest cottages first instead of 3, create a quiet trail through the pines, preserve the boathouse cellar as an archive, and design a small service dog rest area near the birch trees where the ground stayed dry. Aaron spoke about veterans who needed calm without being isolated. May spoke about widows and caretakers who could not rest in places that felt clinical. Ruth spoke about keeping the cabin's scars visible. Nathan listened more than he spoke. When asked what mattered most, he looked at the porch where Scout lay in a patch of weak sun. "No one should feel managed here," he said. "They should feel trusted to breathe." The room went quiet, and Clara wrote it down. By sunset, the first phase had shape. Not grandeur. Not resort shine. Shape. A repaired porch. A safe dock. A hearth that drew properly. A trail wide enough for 2 people and a dog. A ledger in a glass case where future guests could understand that small acts had brought the place back. After everyone left, Nathan walked with Scout down to the dock. The lake had stilled, reflecting the soft pink of the evening sky. He stopped before stepping onto the repaired first section, and Scout waited beside him until Nathan checked the temporary brace. Only then did the dog move forward. Nathan smiled faintly. "Safety before beauty," he murmured. They stood at the edge of the dock, man and dog, looking back at the cabin where one lamp glowed in the front window. He thought of Clara's office, the closed folder, the relatives leaving with everything visible, and the drawer Scout had watched because the real gift had been hidden where impatience would never look. The wind moved over the lake, cool and clean. Nathan placed one hand on Scout's head and understood that the cabin was teaching him the same lesson Evelyn had hidden in every step. Being written out of paper did not mean being written out of love, and a place repaired with patience could become proof that kindness had been keeping records all along. By the 3rd week, Heart Lake had begun to change in the quiet ways Evelyn would have approved of most. The cabin did not look new, and Nathan was glad for that. Its mossy roof had been cleaned where moisture threatened the shingles, but enough weathered green remained on the north edge to remind the place of its years. The porch no longer tilted underfoot. The rail held steady beneath a careful hand. The hearth drew cleanly after Ruth Bell cleared the old draft and repaired the cracked mortar. The dock was still gray and humble, but Walt Granger had braced its weakest posts, replaced the dangerous boards, and marked the far end closed until deeper repairs could be completed. A narrow trail now curved from the cabin to the boathouse and then into the pines, soft underfoot with packed earth and pine needles, wide enough for 2 people to walk together without forcing conversation. Nathan Miller opened the cabin each morning before the lake mist lifted, still a 40-year-old white veteran with broad shoulders, a weathered face, dark brown hair cut short with a few silver threads near his temples, wearing his faded field jacket over a blue work shirt, worn jeans, and scuffed brown boots that now carried sawdust, lake mud, and the clean scent of cedar. Scout entered first, the 6-year-old German shepherd with a black and tan coat, alert ears, strong chest, and calm intelligent eyes, checking the hearth, the porch, the dock entrance, and the boathouse path as if his silent approval remained part of every inspection. Clara Bennett had secured the trust activation under temporary stewardship, and Leonard Pike had released funds only for careful work, safety repairs, preservation, land assessment, and the first guest cottage foundations. Evelyn's relatives had requested review, questioned language, and spoken through attorneys more than through grief, but Clara's answer stayed the same. The Heart Lake Trust was valid. The conditions had been met. Nathan was not claiming the public will. He was honoring the private trust Evelyn had built long before the final room of her life became crowded with other people's opinions. That distinction mattered. It protected the place from becoming a fight before it became a refuge. On a pale Saturday morning, the first trial guests arrived, not to stay overnight yet, but to walk the grounds and help the planning group understand what rest should feel like when it was not forced. Erin Cole brought 2 veterans from her counseling group, both quiet men who seemed relieved when no one asked them to introduce themselves in a circle. May Donnelly brought a widow named Rose who had cared for her husband through a long illness and had forgotten how to sit without listening for a call bell. Ruth brought her nephew, a young carpenter between jobs who had been told he worked too slowly, though Nathan noticed his measurements were exact. They gathered on the porch with coffee in paper cups while the lake held the morning light in silver strips. Scout moved among them gently, accepting a touch from Rose, pausing beside one of the veterans, then settling near the steps where everyone could see him and no one had to speak more than they wished. Nathan did not give a speech. He showed them the repaired step, the hearth, the trail, the safe portion of the dock, and the boathouse door where Clara had placed a small sign reading archive below, access by appointment. Then he led them inside to the hearth. Evelyn's ledger now rested in a temporary glass case on the table, open to the page that mentioned the first roof patch Nathan had made years earlier. Rose leaned over it and read silently. "She wrote down small things," she said. Nathan nodded. "She thought small things were how people survived large ones." The woman looked toward the lake, and her face softened in a way that did not ask to be comforted. Later, they walked the trail beneath pine and birch. The 2 veterans said little, but one stopped near a bend where the lake appeared suddenly through the trees and stood there for several minutes, hands in his jacket pockets, breathing as if the view had given him permission to do it slowly. The young carpenter knelt to study the trail edging and quietly suggested a better drainage cut near a root cluster. Nathan listened, asked him to mark it, and saw the young man's shoulders change when his slowness was treated as care instead of failure. By afternoon, the group returned to the cabin, and May said the place needed one rule written somewhere visible: nothing here has to hurry to be healed. Clara wrote it in her notebook. Nathan looked at Scout, who was lying on the porch with his head on his paws, calm, intelligent eyes half closed toward the water. The dog seemed to have known that rule from the beginning. That evening, after the visitors left, Nathan stayed to clean coffee cups, sweep pine needles from the porch, and close the windows before damp settled in. Clara remained behind with him, reviewing papers at the table by the lake window. "The relatives may still contest parts of the process," she said gently. "But after today, we can document public benefit, preservation use, and pilot programming. That helps." Nathan looked at the ledger in its glass case. "Evelyn did not build this to win against them." "No," Clara said. "She built it so their forgetting would not be the final record." Outside, the lake darkened to blue. Scout stood suddenly and walked to the door, ears lifted toward the boathouse path. Nathan followed with a flashlight. There was no danger, only wind moving through birch leaves and a loose board tapping softly on the boathouse wall. Nathan secured it with 2 screws from his pocket while Scout watched. Small repair, late hour, no applause. The kind of thing Evelyn would have written down. When Nathan returned to the porch, he paused and looked back at the cabin, the trail, the dock, the boathouse, and the lake that had kept the truth safe until kindness came back to find it. Stillwater Rest was not finished. The guest cottages were only marked by stakes. The dock still needed work. The trust still carried legal weight. He was learning 1 page at a time. But today, tired people had stood here and breathed more easily. That was enough to prove the place had begun. Scout leaned against his leg, warm and steady beneath the deepening sky. Nathan placed one hand on the dog's head and listened to the water touch the shore. Evelyn had hidden a fortune under documents, but she had hidden the real inheritance in something quieter, a cabin where people could arrive burdened and discover that no one would demand they explain the weight before offering them a chair by the lake. By early summer, Stillwater Rest had become a name spoken softly in the towns around Heart Lake, not because it was grand, but because people trusted the quiet of it. The old cabin still stood beneath the pines with its weathered boards, repaired porch, clean windows, and stone hearth that now drew warm smoke on cool mornings. The dock stretched into the lake with new braces hidden beneath gray boards preserved where they could be safely kept, and the boathouse, once leaning and forgotten, now held a protected archive below and a small workbench above where simple repairs were taught with patience. 2 guest cottages rested back from the shore between birch trees, modest and bright, their porches facing the water but angled for privacy. A gentle trail circled through pine needles, fern beds, and lake views, wide enough for 2 people and a service dog to walk side by side without needing to hurry. Nathan Miller opened the cabin each morning before the mist lifted, still a 40-year-old white veteran with broad shoulders, a weathered face, dark brown hair cut short with a few silver threads near his temples, wearing his faded field jacket over a blue work shirt, worn jeans, and scuffed brown boots that carried the marks of cedar dust, lake mud, and honest work. Scout entered first every day, the 6-year-old German shepherd with a black and tan coat, alert ears, strong chest, and calm intelligent eyes, pausing at the hearth where Evelyn's ledger sat in its glass case, then checking the porch, the dock entrance, the boathouse path, and the shaded service dog rest area as if the whole place had become a promise he had agreed to guard. Clara Bennett kept the Heart Lake Trust steady and protected, answering every legal question with documents Evelyn had prepared years before the public will was ever read. Leonard Pike kept the accounts honest. Ruth Bell finished the porch repairs and taught the young carpenter how to preserve old wood without making it pretend to be new. Walt Granger returned to inspect the dock after every heavy rain, sometimes staying for coffee just because the lake made him slower in a good way. Aaron Cole and May Donnelly helped shape the first respite schedule so no guest was treated like a case, a project, or a problem to solve. They came as people first, veterans who wanted quiet without isolation, widows who needed to sleep where no one expected them to be strong, caretakers whose hands trembled from years of being needed, old friends who had outlived too many rooms, and service dogs who understood rest better than most humans did. On the first dedication morning, the lake was so still that the pines and clouds seemed to be holding their breath on the surface. There was no ribbon, no stage, no loud music. Evelyn would have hated that. People gathered naturally around the cabin porch with paper cups of coffee, folded jackets, and the uneasy tenderness of those who knew they were standing inside someone's final act of care. Clara spoke briefly about trust, preservation, and Evelyn's instructions. Aaron spoke about rest as something people had to relearn when they had been useful too long. Then Clara asked Nathan to say a few words. He stood near the hearth, one hand resting on the glass case that held Evelyn's ledger, Scout beside him with calm, intelligent eyes lifted toward his face. Nathan looked at the open page, where Evelyn had written about the first roof patch, the furnace outage, the porch rail, the snow rides, the soup, the quiet evenings. For a moment, he was back in the law office, hearing the public will close without his name, hearing the nephews whisper that he was just the handyman. The words no longer cut the same way. A handyman, he had learned, was sometimes the last person standing between a lonely house and collapse. Evelyn did not build this place out of wealth, he said. The money helped repair it. The trust protects it. But this place began with small things. A loose step fixed before someone fell. A ride through bad weather. A dog listening at a door. A chair pulled near a hearth when silence got too heavy. She wrote those things down because she knew the world forgets quiet kindness unless someone keeps the record. No one moved. The lake held the silence gently. Nathan looked through the window toward the dock. Stillwater Rest is not here to make people explain why they are tired. It is here to give them a safe step, a steady chair, a trail, a fire, a lake, and enough peace to remember they are still here. Afterward, people walked the trail in small groups. Rose, the widow from the trial visit, sat on the porch with another woman and said nothing for nearly an hour, and nobody disturbed them. One of the veterans helped the young carpenter adjust the gate latch near the service dog area. May placed fresh towels in the cottages. Clara stood alone in the boathouse for a while, looking at the trapdoor that had led to the lake cellar, her hand resting lightly on the legal seal as if thanking Evelyn for planning beyond paper. Near sunset, when the visitors had gone and the first 2 guests had settled quietly into the cottages, Nathan walked down to the dock with Scout. The boards held firm beneath his boots. The lake stretched wide and silver, touched by the last light. He sat on the edge, and Scout lay beside him with his head on his paws. Behind them, the cabin windows glowed warm through the pines. Nathan thought of the envelope, the brass key, the map, the hearth plank, the boathouse trapdoor, the cellar, the safe, and Evelyn's final letter. He had not been written out of what mattered. He had been written into a place that needed his hands, his patience, and the dog who heard truth before pride could bury it. Scout leaned against him, warm and steady. Nathan placed one hand on the dog's back and listened to Heart Lake touch the shore in small, patient notes. Perhaps kindness is never lost when it is given without demand. Perhaps it waits in hidden rooms, in old ledgers, in cabins no one visits anymore, until the one who stayed gentle long enough to be hurt comes back and finds that love had remembered everything.